sometimes it's better for me to just sit back, bite my tongue, and then in 4 years I'll be able to say what I want.
There has been a gradual institutionalization of this code of conduct, the effect of which is to prevent people from ventilating their views. Bright students won't put up with it.
Buckley Fellows believe that all perspectives must be heard and examined in good faith.
They stand united against the formation of a liberal-only echo chamber at Yale.
We disagree, we debate, and then at the end of the day, we remain friends.
Keep Yale out of politics and focused on education. Sign our petition today, calling on Yale to adopt institutional neutrality. Truth should be Yale's mission, not commenting on every political controversy of the day. Sign the petition at fightforyale.com/institutional neutrality.
Tickets are now on sale for our annual Disinvitation Dinner on May 9th at the Pierre in New York City with noted speaker and human rights activist Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Get your ticket today at buckleyinstitute.com/disinvitation 2024.
I'd like to welcome everyone to Pod and Man at Yale. This time, I'm happy to have Trevor MacKay back, the Buckley Institute student president.
Happy to be here.
And new to the podcast, and I think also our first law student on the podcast, Avi Feinsod.
Nice to join you.
Thank you both for joining me today. I've brought you both on to talk about op-eds you guys wrote in the Yale Daily News recently. Trevor's op-ed was called Disagree, Please, and I encourage everyone listening to check it out. Trevor, can you just give us a quick rundown of what you said in the op-ed?
Yeah, so essentially, as you mentioned, we had an event with a pro-Israel speaker, and there were students that were asking tough questions. We didn't have any disruptive protests. We didn't have any people that were being disrespectful. And basically, my op-ed just highlighted the kind of quality of the discourse and the dialogue from people that were clearly not in agreement with Mr. Abrams, but nonetheless willing to engage with him in a public forum in a respectful manner. And the title, Disagree, Please, is kind of imploring other students on campus to behave in a similar manner.
Avi Feinsod, like I said, who's a law student, wrote about the experience he had at Yale Law School, and I recommend everyone check out his piece also in the Yale Daily News called "A Divided Law School Confronts the Israel-Gaza War." Your experience, the one you detailed in the op-ed, is one that I think most people watching and worried about campus life for the past few months are more familiar with and more worried about. Can you walk us through what exactly happened?
Sure. So just for a little background, I founded this student group, which is still an unofficial student group, last semester after things were difficult after October 7th, and it was difficult to get any student groups to do any events relating to Israel. So I worked with administration to start this group, and they were very helpful to help me start in an unofficial manner. But we've been doing events throughout this semester, and we've been getting pushback.
What's the group called?
Currently, it's called Law Students for Israel.
Mm-hmm.
We've been getting pushback throughout the semester on different events that we've been doing, but none was like this. Once we publicized that we're doing this event, there were, people were unhappy about it. They put up posters on the wall saying no IDF on campus. Things like no self-defense, genocide is not self-defense, no war criminals on campus. And certain students also try to get the administration to stop the event from happening at all. There was a petition going around the law school, which is linked within the article, having the students protesting that we're having this event at all. They shouldn't be happening. It makes students feel unsafe to have this speaker on campus. So there was a lot of protest even before the event happened. And then on the day of the event, there were a bunch of protesters, probably like 25 or more outside on one side of the Baker Hall building, protesting against the event. A few on the other side, so they covered both entrances actually, but they had most people in the front. And then they had a few students come into the event, and also like they stayed for a few minutes. The second the event started, they put up some signs on their laptops, I think quoting something about genocide. And then like a few minutes into the event, this group of students just walked out, which disrupted the event minorly. I mean, not majorly. We had to wait till they left. And then the event was able to continue on.
So, and I recommend everyone check out the op-ed, and particularly the letter that Avi linked in there, because if you're worried about free speech on campus, that is like a garden variety of all the things that will make you angry. So if anyone's told you, this is just a conspiracy theory, like that letter confirms in one document all the things you've heard about censoriousness on campus. And one of the things in particular that I want to highlight, in addition to calling for the cancellation of the event, deplatforming of the speaker, calling on the Yale administration to condemn the speaker, they said that knowing he was speaking somehow made them, quote, physically and psychologically unsafe. Right. So that's kind of nuts, right? The idea that someone else on campus has a different perspective than you would make you physically unsafe. They called his speech, quote, actually dangerous. Like whatever that means. Like that's kind of crazy, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to have the perspective. I was speaking to a friend of mine who disagrees with me on a lot of things, and he compared bringing an IDF speaker to bringing a Hamas speaker on campus, and how would that make you feel? And so that's sort of the perspective where they're coming from, where the IDF is so terrible. They're anyone who's there must be this terrible person. Basically, they're equating them to Hamas. And I guess in that view, maybe it is unsafe. Maybe who knows? Maybe the soldier will try to attack you. But I mean, it's really, yeah. I don't think it might make them feel uncomfortable. It might make them feel challenged. The certain ideas which they hold. But I mean, in the sense of safety, which like physical safety, I mean, there's no threat. And yeah, part of being involved in discourse is it's very uncomfortable.
Trevor, I mean, like it's like if the goal of the university is to like pursue truth and to learn new things, how can you learn new things if you've decided that perspectives that challenge you, as Avi pointed out, make you feel unsafe?
I think that traditionally college students come to college and they seek independence from their parents, from their home. But now college students, a lot of them seem to be coming to college and they want to continue to be parented by the administration, to continue to be coddled by the administration, to continue to be essentially given, quote unquote, a safe space by the university. And the reality should be, or if you truly do believe in the value of a liberal arts education, the value of education at all, you should want to be uncomfortable with the things that you learn. You should want to have your brain exercised. You should want to have to wrestle with issues of deep importance and deep personal significance to yourself.
And that like safety argument, it's kind of, I guess, a brinkmanship argument, or I guess a slippery slope argument. I mean, Avi points out in his letter that if there are Israeli students at the law school, they'll have served in the IDF. And if they see these posters saying no IDF on campus, or IDFs are all, genocidal, or whatever, however they put it, they're not going to feel safe on campus. So the question comes, like, who decides which safety does get recognized and which safety does get protected? Ostensibly, like, you could end up with no one being allowed to say anything on campus.
Maybe nobody should be allowed on campus because we all make somebody else feel unsafe in some way.
And it's and to kind of put a fine point on it, it's kind of it's like asymmetric almost, right? If you're civil and you're saying, they have the right to share their perspective, and if I disagree, you almost get punished for it, right? Because the side that you're contending with has decided that no, if I disagree with this perspective, I want it shut down. I don't want it anywhere. So it kind of puts you at a disadvantage, and generally puts the idea of supporting free speech and supporting people share their perspectives in a place where they're being hurt for ostensibly being civil.
Yeah, I mean that is whatever discourse is like the hegemonic discourse, to use a term which is used, like what's the assumption of the students on campus, like what's the norms, and breaking the norms make people feel uncomfortable, and that could be in either direction depending on which period of history you are in or what time you're in. And now being anything pro-Israel is considered like a cardinal sin. And if you're doing that, it's the same as supporting all these terrible things. I mean, being pro-Israel is just associated with being genocidal, being racist, being supporting an apartheid state, and all these things are just taken as gospel, where we have to believe this. If you don't believe that, then you violated some truth, and you must be there's some problem with you.
You have this great line in your op-ed: "Why listen when you already stand on the right side of history?" You ask. And I think that you alluded to, and this is something that I've said, is that a lot of students, whether or not it's on Israel, Palestine, there's other issues as well, they have this assumption of what truth already is, capital T truth. It's their gospel, like you said. And it's really difficult for them to try to reconcile viewpoints that subvert in some way. In many ways, conservative viewpoints or pro-Israel viewpoints are subversive to them, which is kind of ironic because leftism would have been subversive to the campus in the 50s or the 60s, right? It's kind of the strange flip-flop almost of the roles. But I think that the best way is that we do have to keep pushing at this disagreement. We have to make people uncomfortable. And the fact that people are reacting and saying that they are uncomfortable, I think that is the process of disagreement at work.
And so I will concede that, I've always felt that it's not even the majority of students who feel this way. It's a very loud and very vocal minority, and not even necessarily of students, sometimes faculty, sometimes administrators. And what we found, and we saw at Yale in particular, is you often find these people, when they need it, they'll turn on they'll say free speech, free speech, free speech. But when it's speech they don't like, suddenly free speech principles have gone out the window. Zarina Gruel is a case in point. Yale faculty member publicly celebrated the October 7th terrorist attacks. She was defended by free speech. That's what Yale said in the days after. They said for free speech rights, academic freedom. 2015, when Erica Christakis in the famous Halloween costume incident was, her husband was mobbed because she thought maybe students can figure out their own Halloween costumes. She wrote an op-ed saying why it's not cancel culture and they should be punished and should be fired. Only recently, she wrote a letter kind of like doubling down on that perspective that some perspectives shouldn't be allowed on campus. It's like this weird dichotomy they have in their head where free speech for them, but not for anyone else.
Well, I think that kind of hypocrisy is part of the reason why, especially people on the right, are kind of so annoyed and angry at the institutions of the universities, because they see incidences like the Christakis incident or other instances throughout the last decade of people who don't toe the party line and they are punished for it or canceled for it, or they face some sort of professional or personal repercussions. And then you have, the college presidents going to Congress and invoking free speech, to defend views that many of them view as reprehensible, but they're invoking this. But why weren't they invoking this, 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Why are they choosing to invoke it now? So there's this element of maybe they don't have a double standard, maybe they do, but it's hard to see where their kind of dedication to free speech and open discourse on the university campus truly lies.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I pointed this out in my article where certain people, which are identified as pro-Palestine, they say that pro-Palestinian speech has been suppressed, and they're pushing for free speech. And I found it amusing just because, and this is what I pointed out, where they sponsor an event accusing America of being complicit with genocide, and it's co-sponsored by 4 other student groups. And the room is full. They don't need any security. They don't need to read any statements about to ensure free speech, because obviously this event is going to happen. And people show up, and it goes totally fine. And then I've been running this group, and every event we've been having trouble with people trying to stop it in one way or another. This event was just more public, but people have been trying to deal with events that we do and disrupt them. Usually not like this, but I've also felt a tremendous amount of stress because, being someone who's associated with Israel and publicly has, I've paid a price just dealing with all the stress and people trying to shut you down, knowing a lot of people are not happy with you. And it's just interesting. I don't know how they feel, but when I look at what's going on practically, it's just interesting to think that they feel that they're being suppressed when no one's stopping them. Some people don't like what they say, but they're going ahead and they could do events without being stopped, and still yet they invoke, people are stopping our speech as they try to stop other people from speaking.
So who is it you said that has been kind of the big obstacle? What was it? Fellow students, faculty who've been kind of, I guess, in your way as you've tried to put these events together?
It's mostly been students who have been pushing back on the event. Some of them, they'll protest. Obviously the letter was circulated by a group of students. There are certain students working behind the scenes, trying to get events shut down, causing us trouble with administrators, trying to get us shut down on technical reasons. It's really been a lot of sort of guerrilla warfare to shut down our events. And luckily the faculty has been helping us, and we've been extra careful to work within all the procedural rules. But yeah, it's been difficult, because that anytime you have an event, people are going to try to say something. And we've done, I think, already 5 events this semester. So we've been doing a lot. But it's still every event is stressful. Is it going to go okay? Are we going to be bothered? And yet, I still feel like, it's important to do this because, like the fact that we're working so much against the grain on campus means like this message is not being heard, and maybe it has to be part of the discourse.
So Avi, at the end of your piece, you talk about Yale moving, quote, in the right direction if we pursue questions with empathy, and seriously listen to each other. So based on what you've seen, and what you've seen at Yale Law since October 7th, do you think your classmates really have any interest in moving in the right direction?
I'll admit they're very difficult conversations, but if you could have those conversations, when I've had them, then to be able to see the person as a person which thinks and is struggling the same way you might be, I think that's helpful. But there have been plenty of students which have refused to respond to emails, or when if you ask them to sit down with them, or they'll just demonize you. So in that sense, like there's a mix. I'd say some students I have had positive interactions with, but others I have not. And like the question is, which students do you trust even to sit down with?
So to kind of wrap this discussion up, and do you guys think campus can be turned around? There's a small, loud group that wants to force their perspective on everyone else at all costs. Do you think that small, loud group can be overcome?
I mean, I'm generally pessimistic, so I don't know. I mean, but it is interesting just to see like what happens when people like actually stand up and start getting things done. I mean, it's interesting what happened with our event. Once we were protested, like our numbers for the people that signed up to the event like went up 100%. Like we were like around 30 something, and then we were after the protest and after the letter circulated, then we were maxed out. We had to shut down like because we didn't have enough room. So in that sense, like it is like I am optimistic that if people like take the initiative and do something, then they could make a difference. But on a large scale, I mean, I don't know. I'm always pessimistic. I hope what I'm doing is useful and helpful, but I guess I'll have to wait and see.
I think there is hope. I am also generally pessimistic and maybe even cynical at times, but at the Elliot Abrams event, for example, I was surprised by what happened, being the lack of protests, and I was glad, and it inspired me in part. I've also been and I've been happy with how well the administration seems to be supportive of our events, especially in terms of the students. I think that people throughout the country, and maybe especially young people, are getting tired of having to constantly look over their shoulder and worry about the things that they believe or the things that they think, or the things that they might want to say, whether it be in jest, or maybe they don't have their views fully fleshed out and they're not willing to take a hard stance. And I think people are getting tired of having to feel they must have an opinion on things. They have to be, quote unquote, on the right side of history. They have to be advocating for something, otherwise they're a bad person.
Thank you both again for joining us on Pod and Man at Yale.
Thank you.
Let's get right to our interview with Yale professor David Bromwich, a past speaker at the Buckley Institute. We'll be talking Edmund Burke and William Shakespeare, then discussing the new Faculty for Yale initiative. Check out facultyforyale.yale.edu for more details. I'm pleased to welcome Yale professor David Bromwich to Pod and Man at Yale. Professor Bromwich is an adjunct professor of law at Yale Law School and Sterling professor of English at Yale University. He began his academic career at Princeton University, but has been at Yale since 1988, including a 3-year stint as the director of Whitney Humanities Center. He's a prolific author and writer. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good to be here.
Pleasure to have you. The first thing I want to talk to you about is the Faculty for Yale initiative. It was launched about a month ago, and broadly for our listeners, it's an effort by faculty to help Yale, quote, revitalize its fundamental mission to preserve, produce, and transmit knowledge. Now has signatures from around 150 faculty. Just walk me through what the effort is all about.
Well, I think not just at Yale, and in recent years, not mainly at Yale, but there have been confusions and disruptions over the issue of free speech because of a confusion between, let's say, unrestricted free speech that's directed at truth, at trying to get at the truth by many means, including debate and polite debate, yes, but that is not and should not be taken to be a parallel, an identification between free speech and good speech. I think there's been a tendency at universities, among university and college administrators in general, and again, Yale not prominent here, but Yale not an exception, to want to refine, to cleanse, to make sure that speech is of a kind that all students and all faculty feel comfortable with. That's a mistake about the nature of free inquiry and the nature of speech, which isn't all polite conversation, isn't all about comfortable. But it's gone pretty far the other way in colleges, in universities, from the moment of, let's say, the high point of civil libertarian concern for free speech, the Berkeley free speech movement, 1964, and things that followed elsewhere, establishing unrestricted free speech as a principle universities should want to observe. But then in later years, in the 80s and 90s, you had speech codes coming in at Stanford and elsewhere, and rules about how to speak to people, how to show respect as a prefatory thing, and then grounds for complaint. Quality of life administrators, a new invention of the 70s and 80s, come in to supervise, to make sure nobody's feeling uncomfortable. So, the mission statement, I don't think it's a mission statement, and leave this bit out. The statement on the initiative, as you called it rightly, for faculty for Yale, means to reassert the importance of free inquiry, the search for truth, and the transmission of knowledge as what's essential to university life, and as complete as possible, a liberation from censorship being the only thing compatible with that.
You're one of the early signatories of it. Like I said, it's only a month old. Yes. What was your personal reason for signing? Why did you explained beautifully, I think, the general reasons. Well, was your personal thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there have been incidents at Yale, which you and others who are associated with the university can think of. I won't rattle them off. But most recently at Yale Law School, the incident of two speakers being shouted down because the occasion was thought to be unfriendly to making uncomfortable a whole group of students. Again, strange, at the Yale Law School. And then again, the student, his name was Trent Colbert, I believe, called in for inviting students to a Federalist Society reception where there was going to be fried chicken, and a perfectly absurd fracas followed from that, from complaints by a very few students, and then associate deans or various administrative persons trying to reshape his party to elicit from him a certain kind of statement that would comfort people.
So building off of that, you've been at Yale for a few decades, I kind of said in the bio, you kind of traced the history of this movement from free speech to comfort on campus. Do you think, and you kind of use the word climax, are we at kind of a crescendo of comfort, safety instead of free speech?
I don't know. I've heard people saying they think more good sense is coming in now, and that there's likely to be a less censorial attitude towards speech on campus. But for me, who grew up, in California in the 60s and went to college in the late 60s and the 70s, what was remarkable about the scene of higher education then, including Yale University and UCLA, I took courses at both places, is that universities seemed the freest places with the most wide-ranging and controversial discussions that you could find in the United States. I don't think anyone would argue that they are that now, but they should be. Things were good in the late 60s and 70s. That climate of free speech was good for education and good for society. If what we're concerned with is a free society, a democracy where people know what's on each other's minds.
So one of the other things in the faculty for Yale effort is a call for institutional neutrality. Can you talk a little bit about institutional neutrality is for our listeners and why you think it's important?
I don't think it assists, and in fact, it does, I suspect, impede the sense of freedom of inquiry and freedom of thought and discussion at a university. For the university itself, as the overarching institution, speaking as an institution, as if it were a person, one large person, as in the diagram of Hobbes's Leviathan. There's all those little people, and then there's this gigantic creature. If the university speaks with a single voice on issues in the culture, in society, in politics, it has a becalming effect, a numbing, even an intimidating effect, I suspect, on individuals within the university that prevents them from going against what has become the university position. A university is concerned with education, and that seems to be, it's a matter of common sense, and I think there's agreement about this among the signers of the Faculty for Yale statement, that the issue that an administrator at Yale has warrant to talk about is education. If there's talk of cutbacks for certain kinds of support for education from Congress or whatever, it's good that the university take a stand for education and explain why. So we are defenders of education, but speaking as an institution, the university shouldn't have its mind on other things or show what a big heart it has in this or that way, because it's all a matter of selection. And that's where the three presidents under grilling by Congress got into trouble, because they rightly weren't willing to say, we're for the Palestinians, or we're for the Israelis, or we want this. They didn't want to say that, but they had been willing to say that on many, many other issues previously in the last 10 years.
So what I hear a lot from students, or seen a lot from students, or just people who oppose the idea of institutional neutrality, is they say it's important for the university to stand up for what's right, or to show their students, to stand up for that. So
they want the university to be parental.
I was going to ask you what your response would be. Again,
that's a great difference from the high point of free inquiry at universities, where the description of university responsibilities as being in loco parentis, in place of parents, was pretty nearly abolished. It was understood, maybe prematurely, maybe so in a great many cases, but that when you're 18 and you come to a university, you're, as it were, an adult. You're responsible for yourself. If you do something terrible, you're going to be punished for it. But you don't need the grown-ups who are out there heading the institution to be speaking for you. You should want to acquire your own views about society, about culture, about politics, from arguing with friends, from reading books, from taking a variety of classes. When I was in college, I wanted to be with my friends, going to movies, reading books, and left alone.
Yeah.
I don't, again, a political theorist on this theme, writing in the 1990s and seeing the change of mood, said about students and administrators who were pushing this kind of parental attitude, at home, they want more home. Well, a lot of people have gone far away to college, partly because out of no resentment or dislike of their parents, they wanted to get away from home. They don't want another home.
So when you're not advocating for free speech on campus, you actually do have a full-time job, which is as a professor of English here at Yale. At the beginning of the 2022 fall semester, you spoke to some of our Buckley fellows over at dinner. You talked about your book on Edmund Burke, who's increasingly and already fairly widely recognized as one of kind of the founding, minds or philosophers behind modern conservatism.
I disagree with that from the point of view of Burke, not the point of view of modern conservatives who want to trace a distinguished lineage back to the most articulate and intelligent statesman that Britain has had in modern times. But Burke can be called conservative in his, I'd prefer to say conservationist or preservationist attitude towards the customs and habits that help to define a society. He's for not changing as a matter of principle, and he's against sudden change because it tends to come with violence. But anything much beyond that that could be described as part of a conservative program, it would be hard to trace to Burke as an origin, except, and again, this goes with the business about sudden change and violence, except his hostility toward revolution. He's suspicious of that. And he is also, I suppose this doesn't go with the program of modern conservatives in the Buckley program, certainly in America. He's anti-democratic, small d. Burke was very hostile towards the idea of democracy. He is a great partisan and an early and brilliantly subtle one of representative government. And that means that there is an element of popular influence there. People can't turn out of office someone who isn't worthy of the office. But he is the very opposite of a plebiscitary majority rule believer in democracy.
So perhaps his most famous work, or I'm sure you know his works very well, but is the Reflections on the Revolution in France. I have a copy on my shelf. I love the book. People still talk about it today. Why do you think that book in particular has so much resonance with modern conservatives who look at Burke?
Well, modern conservatives, besides being to some extent anti-popular and distrustful of the mass of people as a guide to government, those being features of Burke's argument in that book that they have in common with him. It's a strong case against simple democracy and against revolutionary politics. And it's got other things in it too. I guess a moderate attitude towards political change in general, and distrust of economic and geopolitical engineering done at too rapid a pace, and so on. So it is for what Burke is identified with more generally, gradual change rather than sudden top-down programmatic change.
Aside from Burke. I bring this up because I talked with him about this before we started, but I'm personally a big fan of Shakespeare. I've read all of Shakespeare's collected works, and I read Shakespeare's plays to my kids. And Professor Bromwich is currently teaching a course on Shakespeare's political plays. I remember when I was in high school, I guess, or maybe junior high, it was the first time I was introduced to Shakespeare, and we read Midsummer's Night's Dream because that was thought of as one of the plays, that and Romeo and Juliet, that you could get the young people interested in. Our audience are students, alumni. Right. What if they had, a few hours on an afternoon, and if you just read Shakespeare straight, you could hypothetically get through one like a play. What would you recommend they pick up first?
Well, the first that really gripped me in high school, we were assigned, because that was standard in public schools at the time, we were assigned Julius Caesar, and I've come to admire that play enormously. But it's not the most gripping or the most tightly plotted by any means. The play that gripped me early was Macbeth. It's got the best plot. It's not overlong. There's nothing extraneous in it, and it's a frightening play. It has. I'll just leave it at that.
Well, Professor Bromwich, thank you so much for coming on Pod and Man and Yale. It was wonderful to have you and talk to you.
Thank you.
And with that, another great episode of Pod and Man at Yale is in the bag. Subscribe if you haven't already, and always remember, for God, for country, for Yale, in that order.